The Great Tribulation refers to tumultuous events that are described during what the Christians refer to as the end times, and first mentioned by Jesus in the Olivet Discourse. The Great Tribulation is also referenced in the book of Revelation. Before the end of the world, as mankind knows it, can begin, and the Great Tribulation of the Great Creator commences, there are a few things that still have to occur in our present world. There are many theories and debates as to when the Great Tribulation will start, but the biblical account states the following events must happen first.
Well, we start with the Belt and Road Forum for International Cooperation set to take place in Beijing on Sunday and Monday. At least 29 heads of state and government leaders are expected to attend. Some dignitaries have already started arriving in the Chinese capital. One of them is Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak. He says the Belt and Road Initiative will cement friendships and boost mutual trade and infrastructure gains. Ethiopian Prime Minister Haile Mariam Desalegn has also arrived in Beijing. Ethiopia is one of the biggest recipients of Chinese investment in Africa. The country partners with China in the sectors of agriculture, energy and technology. President of the Czech Republic Milos Zeman and Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras also arrived earlier on Friday morning. Zeman has hailed the Belt and Road Initiative as the greatest infrastructure project ever undertaken. Tsipras is scheduled to meet with Chinese government officials in a bid to promote Greece as China's main entry point to Europe.
Some people say that NWO, or New World Order, is a group. Some people say it is an idea. It is mentioned enough over the years from George H.W. Bush, who just so happens to be a Freemason, and in Skull and Bones, and assumingly a multitude of other secret societies. There is a now listed as disbanded P.NAC that outlines it. The leaked documentation from 1776 of the supposed Illuminati. Some people fear the day when we have a one-world government. The Antarctic Treaty was signed by 53 countries in 1961. Like Russia, the United States, Germany, Japan, North Korea, Cuba. All countries that are notorious for being at war. A character by the name George Soros is credited for, since the 1970s, of funding paid protests and riots internationally, as well as strong-arming countries financially by bankrupting them if they don't go along with his plans. All media is controlled by 6 corporations that have the same interest. The Rothschild family owns all banks. International agendas like LGBT. International sexual awareness at an early age agenda. International law. The International Affairs Division of FEMA. The International RFID Institute. The 27th secret is that we have had a one-world government for at least 60 years.
In April, policymakers will gather in Washington, D.C. to assess the state of the global economy. Part of their discussions will focus on the optimism that has recently taken over in some of the larger advanced economies, or the G7. Is this justified? Our analysis of the hard data shows a slight acceleration in G7 GDP growth to 1.7% in the last quarter of 2016, which is broadly in line with the post-crisis average. However, what's really driving the optimism is the broad-based nature of the recovery, as indicated by the less variation in the growth rates than any time in the past 20 years. We think 3 reasons explain this trend. First, the continued highly accommodative monetary stance across the G7, and in particular in the Eurozone, despite the gradual rise in US rates from historic lows recently. Second, governments starting to spend more, with some putting infrastructure plans in place. And third, an uptick in demand from the large emerging markets, partly driven by fiscal stimulus in China during summer, as well as a turnaround in economic activity in Brazil. So, will this continue in the future? Most survey-based data suggests that the momentum is expected to carry on to the first quarter of this year. Even so, we think that policymakers' discussion should focus on the key factor that determines long-run standards of living, that of productivity.
La mayor parte de los habitantes del planeta se declaran creyentes. Esto debería provocar un diálogo entre las religiones. No debemos dejar de orar por él y colaborar con quienes piensan distinto.
Confío en Buda.
Creo en Dios.
Creo en Jesucristo.
Creo en Dios, Alá.
Muchos piensan distinto, sienten distinto, buscan a Dios o encuentran a Dios de diversa manera. En esta multitud, en este abanico de religiones, hay una sola certeza que tenemos para todos. Todos somos hijos de Dios. Confío en vos para difundir mi petición de este mes. Que el diálogo sincero entre hombres y mujeres de diversas religiones conlleve frutos de paz y justicia. Confío en tu oración.
That was in 2013. 2014, just a year and a few months afterwards, the World Alliance of Religions for Peace Summit in Seoul, South Korea, 18 September 2014. Here we are, the religious leaders of the world, and representing all of the religions of the world, with a mega slogan, "We are one."
I'm reading from Arutz Sheva, which is one of Israel's top newspapers, dated November 10th, 2013. And the headline states, Islamists are threatening that their Al-Aqsa Mosque atop the Jerusalem Temple Mount is a volcano ready to explode. The article states that the Islamic movement in Israel warned Sunday against an alleged Israeli plan which will divide the Temple Mount between Jews and Muslims in a way which allows the Jews to pray regularly. One of the top Islamist sheikhs is declaring that Israel is now ready to build their third temple, and you know, the sheikh is absolutely right. Israel is about to build their third temple, and it's right on time with all other Bible prophecies, which are now clearly at an apex, including Daniel 9:27, which states that Antichrist and the end-time Jews of Israel will make a 7-year agreement for Israel to go ahead and build their third Jerusalem temple. In fact, the next meeting between Pope Francis and Israel's Knesset is already scheduled to take place in the next few weeks in December of 2013. So prophetically in today's end times, these are the two parties to keep an eye on from this point on, since Daniel 9:27's signing of a 7-year agreement between the papacy of Rome and Israel is the very next major end-time prophecy which will occur right before our eyes.
Reference is from Amos 9, verse 11. In that day I will raise up the fallen booth of David, and wall up its breaches. I will also raise up its ruins, and rebuild it as in the days of old. And the point being of this post, this Israel's lead rabbi, David Law, came out promoting building a Jewish temple next to the Muslim Dome of the Rock. Now, he was opposed to this as recently as October 2015. Political support continues to grow for a third Jewish temple, and the belief is these two structures can be built side by side. And included in the article referenced is an interview with the leading Jewish rabbi, his thoughts on it, and, you know, as stated earlier, in October of last year, he didn't think it was appropriate for Jews to go up on the Temple Mount. Well, he's changed his mind, and he's got other politicians thinking the same thing that he does. And the pro-temple movement continues to grow within the Israeli government.
Israel's right-wing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was just re-elected for the fourth time. His party's war hawk ideology has been a source of severe tension between Israel, Palestine, and their neighbors. But those strained and often violent relations go back the entirety of Israel's 67-year history. In the middle of one of the world's most controversial disputes, we wanted to know, just how powerful is Israel? Well, since its foundation, Israel has been growing in size. The original 1947 UN partition allocated 5,500 square miles for about 1 million inhabitants. Today, nearly 8 million live within 8,000 square miles. Israel's population density rivals that of India and surpasses Japan. This is unsurprising, as Israel holds religious significance not only for 75% of Jews who live there, but also the Muslims and Christians who populate the area as well. So how does Israel fare economically? Although they're on the smaller side, Israel's GDP is around $300 billion, ranking them 37th worldwide and 19th in the UN's Human Development Index. Israel is a high-tech startup hotspot. It's nicknamed Silicon Wadi after the Arabic word for valley. Some have pointed to their cultural emphasis on education and disproportionate numbers of scientists and engineers as the leading cause for the ongoing technological boom. Many wealthy American figureheads have praised and invested in Israel's economy as well, including Bill Gates and Warren Buffett. Israel is also home to one of the largest diamond cutting and polishing industries, although the land itself is low on natural resources. Additionally, Israel attracts millions of tourists every year, a significant source of income. However, when discussing Israel's worldwide influence, it is their military and defense technology that brings them the most attention. Israel is one of the world's largest arms producers, supplying 10% of all military equipment, mostly to the US and EU. More than 60% of drones come from Israel. With such a large arms supply, it is probably unsurprising that Israel has the most powerful military in the Middle East and ranks 11th worldwide. They are able to maintain this lead by devoting as much as 6% of their GDP on defense spending. They also are helped by their special and significant relationship with the United States. The U.S. sends Israel more than $3 billion a year in military aid. This partnership gives the U.S. a strong foothold in the Middle East. Israel is also protected by its position as a major non-NATO ally. However, during Barack Obama's presidency, tensions between the two countries have grown over Iran's attempts for nuclear power and Israel's continued settlements in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Golan Heights. All in all, despite their vulnerable position in the Middle East, Israel has been able to hold its own for over half a century. Their mixture of military dominance, international support, and economic strength makes Israel one of the world's most powerful countries.
And the woman fled into the wilderness. How is that faithful become a harlot? Well, this is how. They've left the solid rock foundations to compromise and complacency and tolerance. Can you spot the difference between the club and the church? Few Sabbath or second coming songs. All this is done within the church, and isn't it enough to make a stone statue weep? Professor Walter Martin, who is the director of Christian Research Institute, says, "Let me tell you something that I have learned. I know the liberals, I know them well. I was one of them. They are the most dangerous, insidious, and all-pervading cult that's loose in the United States right at this moment. Apostasy will increase. Some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils, Paul writes in Timothy. Men and women have confederated to oppose the Lord God of heaven, and the church is only half awake to the situation. There needs to be much more prayer, much more of earnest effort among professed believers, writes one Christian writer. Satanic agencies in human form will take part in this last great conflict to oppose the building up of the kingdom of God. Heavenly angels in human guise will be on the field of action. The two opposing parties will continue to exist till the closing up of the last great chapter in this world's history.
The purpose of the tribulation period is twofold. One, to bring about the conversion of Israel to prepare them for their Messiah. And two, to pour out God's judgment on the unbelieving nations of the world. There are a few books in the Old and New Testaments of the Christian's Holy Bible which describes a tribulation that will befall mankind. It will last for 7 years. In Revelation chapter 11 verses 2 and 3, it speaks of 1,260 days and 42 months. And in the book of Daniel chapter 12 verses 11 and 12, it speaks of 1,290 days and 1,335 days. Some scholars believe these days have a reference to the midpoint of the tribulation. Many believe the real suffering will take place in the latter 3.5 years, with the first 3.5 years pretty much like it is now. There are also many Bible scholars that believe most of the events of the tribulation period are of symbolic nature and are not to be taken literally. But like any other theoretical conclusion, it is supported by individual opinion and refuted by individual interpretation.